Hello, everybody, and welcome to Digital Hammurabi. My name is Megan Lewis, and I am the host and operator of this fine channel. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Bart Ehrman, who is the James A. Gray Distinguished Professor in the Department of Religious Studies and author of many, many books, most recently Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife. Dr. Ehrman is here to tell us about his upcoming webinar and to kindly answer a couple of questions that I have for him. Dr. Ehrman, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. Before we get into the questions that I've prepared, would you mind just giving us a bit of an overview about the webinar you have coming up?
Right. So it's going to be on Sunday, December 5th. It'll be an all-day thing. It'll be I'll give 4 lectures and with question and answer after each one. The topic is, did the Christmas story really happen? And so the issue is, how do we know that the stories that's told every Christmas, that we get from the New Testament, how do we know that they're historical or legendary or both? I mean, and so it'll be dealing with that, what we can say about what actually happened to Jesus' birth and what kind of legendary ideas sprung up, that some of which got into the New Testament.
Perfect. And I will be putting a link to that in the description box for those of you who are interested in registering. So on to my questions. Dr. Ehrman, we have a series on our channel that covers the basics of textual criticism in the Old and the New Testament. So your area of expertise is obviously a New Testament. Would you mind taking a few minutes and introducing our audience to textual criticism of the New Testament?
You mean in the technical sense of manuscripts and such? Yes.
Yes.
Because, a lot of people, as you know, say textual criticism and they mean like the interpretation of text or something, and that's not what this is. So your audience is a step above. So, very good. So textual criticism is a discipline that you find in every literary field, just about every literary field, because even in modern writing, sometimes you don't know what an author originally wrote. Fairly modern times. In the 19th century, there's all sorts of textual criticism on Wordsworth, and of course on Shakespeare. So the deal is for the ancient writings, like the New Testament, since there was no printing press or any other way to reproduce writings faithfully, they had to be copied by hand. And when a copyist makes a copy of a text, if it's a long text, they'll often make some kind of mistakes, or sometimes they'll change the text intentionally. And so with the New Testament, we have over 5,600 partial or complete manuscripts of the New Testament. So handwritten copies is what a manuscript is. We have over 5,600 of them, which is great because it's far more than any other book in the ancient world. But because there's so many, there are also a lot more mistakes, hundreds of thousands of mistakes in these various manuscripts. And what textual criticism does is it tries to figure out, if you've got verses worded in different ways, which is probably the way that the author wrote it and which represent the various changes. And so you're interested both in knowing what the original text is and also in knowing why scribes might have changed it.
Wonderful. And when you're looking at these changes, how easy or how difficult is it to distinguish between accidental mistakes and deliberate additions or omissions?
Sometimes it's not possible at all. A lot of times the accidental mistakes, though, is just clear as can be, because they'll leave out a word and it doesn't make any sense now, or they'll leave out a word, they'll leave out a few words because it'll be pretty clear because the words end with the same letters that the words before that they did copy, and so they skipped, and so misspellings. There are lots of things that are clearly accidental, and there are lots of things that clearly are not accidental per se. I mean, somebody added the last 12 verses to the Gospel of Mark.
That's quite a substantial change.
It wasn't a slip of the pen.
Thank you. When then you're looking at textual variants, and you've got variants that maybe make sense, that they're changes that make sense, how do you go about determining which is the correct or the original reading?
Well, it's very complicated, and there are a lot of debates. I mean, there's pretty good agreement on most of the passages of the New Testament, but there are plenty of passages where scholars can't agree. All these years later, they just don't. So basically, we don't know. But so what we do is we look at what kind of manuscripts are supporting various readings. Which readings do you find in the oldest manuscripts, and the ones that you can judge on other grounds tend not to make as many mistakes. So that's a useful piece of evidence. You look to see if you've got two ways of the text being worded. You see, like, one of these ways is fairly a common way that this author expresses himself, the kind of vocabulary and writing
Mhm.
style and theology that the author normally has. And that if you've got two variants, one is like that, and the other is like not at all what this author ever said. So that's a good piece of evidence. And also, interestingly, you look to see if you've got two readings that are at odds with each other, whether one of them would have caused problems for scribes who might think, this is theologically iffy, or this is a contradiction, or this is a geographical mistake, or something
Mhm.
that might lead a scribe to want to change it. And so those are the three main kinds. You look at the manuscripts, you look at what the author might have written, and you look at what the scribes might have wanted to write, and then you make a cumulative argument and then reach your best decision.
Thank you. And I think that last point is an interesting one, and something that was maybe a little surprising to me as a graduate student, to learn that when you're looking at things like textual variants, you tend to go generally with the more difficult reading, because if there is a problem, people are going to want to correct it for you.
You know, the scholars recognized this a very long time ago. So back in the 18th century, one of the great scholars came up with this idea that you go with the electio difficilior. The more difficult reading is more likely the right one. And it's borne out because they had this principle for years, and then they started finding earlier manuscripts. And the earlier manuscripts tended to have the more difficult reading. So, okay, that helps show it.
Thank you. Could you then give us an example of a debated and important textual variant that you see in the New Testament?
A debate over an important textual variant?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, there are lots, and so, like, I wrote this book that's called "The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture," that tried to show how scribes had changed their texts in places to make them more theologically suitable for their orthodox theologies. And so I dealt with a bunch of these kinds of things. But, like, one that's always been a kind of a favorite of mine is in Luke chapter 22. Jesus is in the garden praying before he's arrested, and in two verses 43 and 44, we're told that he was in deep agony and he began sweating drops as if of blood, and an angel came down to support him. And so this is where we get the idea of sweating blood comes from. The verses, though, aren't in some of our best manuscripts, and and some of the earliest manuscripts. So there are large debates among scholars, and have been for a very long time. Is it that a scribe found these verses problematic, and so, like, took them out because, like, Jesus really shouldn't be in this much agony, he's the Son of God? Or did a scribe think that this would be useful to insert to show how Jesus was really gripped with human emotion here at the end? And so that's the debate. And I firmly think that it's the latter. I think these verses got put into Luke for a large number of reasons, but it's an interesting debate because it's such an important passage.
Thank you.
Without these verses, by the way, Jesus does not seem to experience any grief at all in Luke's account, unlike Mark. So it ends up mattering.
Thank you very much. Well, I am going to wrap up, but thank you again for taking the time to come and talk to us. And Dr. Ehrman, would you mind just giving us again the briefest information about what it is and when it is happening?
So it's happening on Sunday, December 5th. It'll be 4 lectures, all on the question of did the Christmas story really happen? And so what is history and what is legend in the infancy narratives of Matthew and Luke?
And if you are watching and you don't think that sounds interesting, then I really don't know what to tell you. But I know where I will be on December 5th. So, Dr. Ehrman, thank you again.
Okay, thanks so much.